I asked my son to help me fight the neighbor's kid as a joke. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "It's about time." I had seen the trend all over my feed for weeks, the one where parents tell their kids they need help fighting the neighbor, and the kid has to fight their kid. I figured my 10-year-old would probably just laugh at me and call me weird. I walked into his room with my phone ready and told him I needed his help with something serious, that me and the neighbor were about to throw down and he needed to handle their son. I expected him to giggle, but instead his whole face changed, and he looked at me with zero hesitation and said, "Good, because I've been waiting for someone to do something about that kid." The smile dropped off my face, and I lowered my phone and asked what he meant by that, and he just stared at me like I was supposed to already know. I sat down on his bed and told him the fight thing was just a dumb joke from the internet, but he needed to tell me what was going on right now. He was quiet before he said that the neighbor's kid had been terrorizing him for almost a year, and when I asked what that meant, he told me it started with knocking his bike over, but had gotten so much worse. He said the kid shoved him into a fence last month and told him if he ever snitched, he would make sure something really bad happened to him. I asked why he never came to me, and he said, "Because last time I told you a kid was being mean, you said I needed to toughen up and handle it myself, so I figured that's what I was supposed to do." I remembered saying exactly that about 2 years ago, and I had no idea those words would teach him to suffer in silence. And then he pulled up his sleeve and showed me a bruise that was still yellow and fading, and said the kid grabbed him 3 days ago and twisted until he almost cried, and something in me snapped. I told my son to stay inside because I was going next door right now, and he begged me not to go because he said the dad was scary too. I told him I didn't care if the dad was 10 feet tall because nobody was going to put their hands on my child and get away with it, and I marched across the lawn and pounded on their front door. The dad answered, looking irritated, and said, "What do you want?" I told him his son had been physically hurting mine for months and we had a serious problem. He laughed and said, "Kids rough each other up. That's called growing up. Maybe your boy needs to stop being so soft." I said this wasn't roughhousing because his kid had been threatening mine, and he stepped onto the porch close enough that I could smell the beer on his breath and said, "Maybe the reason your son is getting picked on is because you raised a little pansy who can't stand up for himself." I understood exactly where his kid learned to be cruel. I told him I needed to speak to his son because this was getting addressed tonight, and he shoved my shoulder and said, "Get off my property before I make you leave." Right then, his wife appeared in the doorway and said, "What is going on out here?" I told her that their son had been hurting my kid for almost a year while her husband tried to talk over me, and I watched her face go pale. She called their son to the door and asked, "Have you been hurting the boy next door?" And the kid started shaking his head until I said, "He told my son he would break his fingers if he ever told anyone, and there's a bruise on my kid's arm right now to prove it." The kid went silent and couldn't make eye contact with his mother. She turned to her husband with pure disgust and said, "This is exactly what you teach him. I told you it would turn him into a monster." The dad said, "You're going to believe this guy over your own family." And she said, "Shut your mouth for once in your life. I am so sick of cleaning up after you." She turned to me and apologized and said she would be handling this because clearly her husband was incapable of raising a decent human being, and she made her son apologize directly while his father stood there fuming. When I got home, my son was watching from the window, and he asked me if I would actually have fought that guy for him. I told him I just did.